This is Medic Life TV, a video podcast for EMS professionals with your host, John Newton.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Medic Life. I am your host, John Newton, and this week's episode is a special episode, a salute to veterans. And I had a chance this week to sit down and talk to a couple of gentlemen. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to play those interviews for you guys as I speak. And part one is going to be with Mr. Jeremy Gassert, who served his time in the Air Force. And part two is going to be with Mr. Russ, and he served his time in Vietnam in the Army. So before we get started, just want to remind you guys to subscribe, like, and share. Spread the word. We like to get the word out to as many people as possible.
John, thanks for having me on. I really do appreciate this opportunity to talk to your audience a little bit. Like you said, I'm a paramedic in Pennsylvania, but I started out as an EMT in Pennsylvania when I was in high school, and then right after high school, I joined the Air Force and decided to become a medic in the military. And I've served in the Air Force from 2002 to 2011, and did a variety of different things. The Air Force medical services are pretty diverse in the roles that we could fill. So I actually started working out on a telemetry floor. And then I went from a telemetry floor to doing education and training, where I ran the ACLS and BLS program for Wilford Hall Medical Center, which at the time was a level 1 trauma center in South Central Texas. And then from there, I did a deployment in Iraq, Afghanistan, came back, worked in the ER for a little while. And then I moved out to New Mexico, where I was an instructor at the U.S. Air Force Pararescue Combat Rescue Officer School for about 2 years before I ended up getting out and kind of reintegrating into civilian life. So yeah.
Well, cool. Before we started, you and I were kind of chatting, and you were telling me a little bit about it. And I'll tell you, my background in the military, I'm a Marine, and I was a firefighter in the Marine Corps, so we didn't do medical. I worked as a civilian here as a civilian paramedic at Fort Gordon. I live near Fort Gordon here in Augusta, Georgia. And I'm familiar with Army medics and a little bit about their job. Kind of tell me how the Air Force works theirs, and explain it to everybody how the Air Force is maybe the same or even different than the Army and their medics.
So when most people think of the Army medic, the first that comes to mind is the 68 Whiskey, which I'm pretty sure their job title is even combat medic. And the Army does a lot of the same things that we do. They still work in the hospitals and things like that when they're in garrison, especially if they're assigned to a medical unit or whatever. But in the Air Force, like I said, I started off on a telemetry floor. A lot of the people that I went to tech school with ended up working in clinics, doing primary care and that kind of stuff. Had a couple of friends that worked as ICU technicians. So it was, as long as you went to a facility or a base that had a large facility, you could work anywhere in the hospital.
So what was tell me a little bit about your initial training, and maybe for those people who have not been in the military, that have actually been through basic, intermediate, advanced EMT, and maybe even paramedic school, kind of compare that for us and make it make sense to everybody.
So my tech school training took place in Wichita Falls, Texas. And it was approximately 4 months in duration, I believe. It's now the school is part of the tri-service. It's Army, Navy, and Air Force down in San Antonio, Texas. That's at
Medcom.
Yeah, that's now they have the tri-service. Everybody's kind of conjoined to save money. No, my training was primarily it was kind of weird. There was a block of training that was the National Registry course. We did a National Registry EMT course. I was able to skip that block and just test out because I was already an EMT coming into the Air Force. But the majority of the training really focused more on sort of like LVN or LPN sort of training in hospital care, wound care, EKGs, you know, drawing labs, starting IVs, all that kind of stuff. So it was a little bit, you know, that EMT block was just one small portion of it.
So it's kind of like a EMT basic plus. You had a little bit of basic EMT versus some stuff from paramedics, some from kind of nursing stuff, this kind of thing.
Absolutely.
You guys could do like sutures and things like that too, right? And
that was something as part of your upgrade training, because the way the Air Force does it, you have different levels. You start out as a 3 level, and then you go to a 5 level, 7 level, 9 level, so on and so forth. Then once you have your 9, once you make like Chief Master Sergeant, which is E9, then you can sort of like become like a 00 category, which was like the superintendent for the career field and stuff like that. As you sort of progress, so like a 3 level isn't expected to know how to do sutures, but like a 5 and a 7 level are expected to know how to suture and do a few additional tasks as well. And then like specialized tasks within the whatever clinical setting that you happen to be working in. When I got back from Iraq, I decided that, you know what, I want to be a paramedic. And so I put myself through paramedic school. They paid for it, don't get me wrong, under the tuition assistance. But, you know, I put myself through paramedic school my own time. And then I was later able to use those skills because the Air Force actually created a specific designation for paramedics, what we call the Special Experience Identifier, which was really nice because then when I deployed, I knew that when I was deployed, I knew that my paramedic skills would be put to use and I wouldn't just be stuck, you know, cleaning out trachs and giving bed baths all the time. So,
and I know this is always a touchy subject when we talk with veterans and stuff like that, but tell me about some of your experiences while you were hanging out in theater, so to speak, in Afghanistan or Iraq.
So I served in Balad, Iraq at the LSA Anaconda in 2005. Got there in January 2005, basically a few months after the whole Fallujah thing had gone down. And while I was there, we actually treated roughly 4,500 patients, you know, both U.S. military, coalition, Iraqi civilians, Iraqi military. We even took care of the bad guys too. So, you know, it was a lot of people running through. We were a major hub. The 2 major hubs were Baghdad and Balad, as far as like big hospitals and getting people moved out. So they would come to us and then they would go to off to Germany or, you know, or back to their unit or whatever.
So was this like a clinic type setting, or did you guys run kind of like a makeshift ambulance service on post, or how did this work?
So the hospital itself, I mean, although it was intense, it wasn't intense, it was physically in a tent.
I got what you mean. That's funny.
It was basically the equivalent of a level 1 trauma center here in the States, just on a much sort of smaller scale, and a much sort of just a different setting all around. You know, most level 1 trauma centers don't have mortars and rockets landing next to them on a regular basis. So, Black Hawks landing on their helipad on, you know, round the clock. So, again, now I believe they have a brick and mortar structure that's set up there. But while I was there, we were basically, you know, big GP medium tents, and they were all linked together. We had everything. We had CT scans, we had X-ray, we had multiple ORs, we had a big trauma bay. You know, we had a couple of wards, had a couple of ICUs. So it was a pretty interesting setup. And then when I went to Afghanistan, I actually ended up at a smaller hospital, and I was attached to the Army with the 96th Combat Support Hospital out of Washington State. So that was kind of a different dynamic. It was a smaller facility, but a lot of the same capabilities. You know, CT scan, X-ray, but in Afghanistan, we were focusing. Well, actually, in Iraq too. It's all basically the mission there is damage control surgery, save lives, and doesn't have to be pretty. Just get them alive and then get them out to Germany. keep them alive, get them to Germany. And then they would undergo additional surgeries there. And then from there, they would go off to, Walter Reed or something like that, or another hospital here in the States. So, yeah.
Yeah. I know when I worked at Fort Gordon, we got a lot of those guys that would come from in theater to Lahnstuhl, and then they would come to us. And I think they spread them out, and I don't really know how they figure out how they're going to spread them out, because some of them will come straight to like here. You were talking about those guys in Washington State. Since all this has kind of been going on, it's really odd that for whatever reason, their group has probably sustained from the Army aspect, probably the largest amount of casualties from that region, the people that are attached to those units that live in that region. And it was kind of interesting that you said you were attached to them. I've got a couple of friends here that were attached to them, and they talk about how they've lost. We got one guy, I'm actually in a running group here. It's called Wear Blue, Run to Remember. And it was, you may be familiar with them. They were actually established because of to basically remember those guys from there in the Washington State area, because they lost almost everybody in their whole company. There was just a handful of them over about a year span. So it was just really, it's kind of interesting that you were in some of those areas. And I guess my question to you now would be is, after you say you started out as being an EMT, maybe in high school, and you've, you went through the military, and so you had a different kind of experience going through getting your training and things like that. Do you think that your military experience has helped you or made a difference in how you, interact with your patients and stuff?
Absolutely. 100%. When I got out of the military, I moved back to my hometown, and I got a job as a paramedic in a rural county in upstate Pennsylvania doing 911. And, it was a little bit different. It took definitely some getting used to, and, not being in that military environment and, interacting with other people. But the experience that I had, my experience was somewhat unique at the time for the Air Force, because when I went to Afghanistan, I was going out on combat missions. And because I was a paramedic, a lot of times if we had an ICU patient that needed to be medevac to, another facility like Bagram, for example, a lot of times I would get on the helicopter and kind of manage these ICU patients for transport and stuff like that. Which at the time there was a few Air Force medics that were doing that. Now it's more and more common. The Air Force is picking up a lot more of that slack, but, so now I'm doing ground critical care transport in the Philadelphia area. And I can tell you, it's my experience. I can walk in saying, yes, I've actually, criped people. I've done, a lot of these different skills, pericardial centesis, things that we're doing now on the ground. The fact that we just introduced ketamine into our protocols earlier this year. I have a ton of experience administering ketamine in the combat environment. So, that level of that comfort level, that I had earlier with it is translating directly into what we're doing today. Playing with transexamic acid. We just added transexamic acid to our protocols as well for traumatic bleeds and stuff like that. So,
and I just want to stop you here and just for those of you who may not be familiar that's watching this or whatever, what he's talking about, and you can look it up, and I'll put a link for you guys in the description, and you can kind of look it up. It's also known as TXA, and it's basically to help with clotting and things like that. And we are getting it here in the U.S., and it's spreading. It's slow, but we're going to start seeing it probably more and more common in EMS. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Go ahead.
No. You're fine. The other thing too, 2007, we accidentally ordered an entire case of King Airways when I was in Afghanistan. I had no idea what they were. They showed up, and I was like, "Oh, what are these?" But was able to get in contact with the company, and they were able to kind of give me some pointers and stuff like that. And so again, here in the States in 2007, not a lot of people were playing around with King Airways, and now everybody's got them.
Yeah.
And I guess I would be remiss if I didn't mention tourniquet use and all that other kind of stuff. the military, we basically rewrote the book on tourniquets.
Yeah, we really have. We've changed the way we look at tourniquets now. We used to say, oh, that's a last-ditch effort, and now it's like one of the first things we do.
It absolutely was. If I ever had a patient who'd been shot or a victim of an IED explosion or something like that, if I saw bleeding on an extremity, I immediately slapped a tourniquet on as high up on that extremity as I possibly could. Let's get that bleeding controlled immediately. Focus on the rest of the assessment. And then once I get back down to that extremity in my assessment, then I can actually expose it, look at it, determine if a tourniquet is actually needed. I could take it down to a pressure dressing if that's all I needed. I could remove it completely if, there really wasn't anything major there at all. So the military doctrine towards tourniquets is still a little bit different than most civilian EMS protocols.
We don't remove them.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, the idea being is that potentially I could be stuck with a patient for a couple of hours before we could get casualty evacuation set up for these guys. That really, I never really ran into any of those particular scenarios where I had to sit on the ground for a long time with a particular patient. But yeah, no, I was privileged to be thrown into these situations. They always ask me, they said, do you want to go do this? And I was like, absolutely. Why not? It was exciting. It was fun. It was interesting. And it absolutely contributed to my career later on down the road. So.
Well, this week it's been the Marine Corps birthday. It's Veterans Day. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't say, thank you for your service. And definitely thank you for talking to me about some of it today. I definitely would like to have you back and maybe talk a little bit more about military medicine versus how we do things today in EMS. And I don't know. There's definitely some stuff that we could talk about, I think.
Absolutely. Well,
yeah.
we talk a lot when we go to these expos and stuff like that anyway. But anytime you need me, I'm here. And again, thank you, sir, for your service. And happy birthday to the Marine Corps, because,
Hurrah!
Yeah.
So I guess my final, I'm going to let you just make the final statement here, and then we'll end this interview. So final thoughts, advice to anybody who is looking to go into the medical field in the military. What are your thoughts?
There are endless possibilities for anybody who is looking to join the military in one of the medical career fields. It doesn't, and of course I'm a little biased, I usually tell people, yeah, check out the Air Force, but between the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, there are a multitude of career fields that involve medicine, all the way from, X-ray techs, lab technicians, respiratory therapy, and then like the jobs that I did and what some of my friends did as combat medics in the Army. And then, if you're really one of those like type A personalities, super high speed, I want to just go out and save lives and blow stuff up, there's always the pararescue career fields, which is part of the U.S. Air Force Special Forces or Special Operations Command, rather, that does the combat search and rescue. And I was, like I said, I was an instructor at their schoolhouse for a few years, and the best group of guys ever to work with. They work hard, but they play hard and have a good time. And it was eye-opening experience interacting with them and playing around with them. I got to do some really cool stuff that I wouldn't otherwise have been able to do. So yeah, absolutely. There are multiple opportunities. And the best part about it is they pay you to go to school, basically. You're gonna walk out with a lot of the equivalent civilian certificates and things like that, which I know is a big issue right now. I know a lot of states are sort of giving EMTs coming out of the military a hard time in getting their civilian credentials, even though they should be coming out with national registry certificates, because the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy all do national registry certificates. So I'm not really sure what the it's probably a bureaucratic issue, but if even like I have friends that went to were respiratory therapists in the Air Force, came out with all the same civilian certificates and training, and then you use your GI Bill, you go get some college credits, and now you have a degree on top of all that. So it's an excellent way to get your feet planted firmly in the ground, and you're going to get a ton of experience, and that's what employers are looking for when they come out. So you're not going to be starting off on the bottom in the civilian world. So yeah, my advice is, if you're interested in medicine, absolutely look at the military. It was the best experience in my life. And if I could do it all over again, I would absolutely do it all over again. So